Hi everyone, Evan Alexander here with another Cinema4D tutorial on a snowy, pandemic-y kind of day. Hope everyone's okay. I want to talk more today about instances and cloners. I know we did a tutorial about this, but there's just so much good information. So this is part 2. Let's not waste any time and dive in. I've got a simple scene here, just a few chairs scattered around here on a floor. We've got one kind of master chair here, and then 2 instances of it. So I talked in the first video about how you can't scale instances. Well, you can, but you can't scale it using the scale tool. So how do we scale instances? Well, if you select the instance and you come down to the attributes here, let's open this up a little bit here, and you go over to coordinates. Here I've got my positioning and I've got my angle, right, and pitch and rotation. But then I also have scale, which by default is set to 1, 1, 1. So think of 1 as 100%. So if I were to come in here and start playing with these values, like 2, 2, 2, then I can get, it's still an instance, but it is in fact now kind of, 200% or double the size of that. Or we can go into decimals. If I say 0.5, 0.5, 0.5, then I can kind of half size it. And so it still works. It's like a scaled symbol in Vectorworks, basically. I never do this, but I think it's important that you know it's there. All right. So this is great. We've got our chairs. We've got our master here. It's red. Now, what if you change your mind about this chair, right? There's always one that has to be different. So in Vectorworks, if you have one symbol that needs to be different, you need to convert it to a group, right? Command K, Control K, which will kind of break the chain of it being a symbol. It's kind of the same idea here in Cinema. So if I say, you know what, I no longer want this chair to be a symbol because I want it to be blue, or I want to change the geometry of it, we can actually, kind of break this back into actual geometry. So I'm going to select the instance here in the Object Manager. I'm going to come down to this button here, which is, it's like a hexagon with a pencil in it, Make Editable. The shortcut is C, as in caret. And if I hit this, what's going to happen is it's going to make a null for me, but inside of that, it's going to put like an actual piece of geometry in there for me. So what I've done is I basically said, you are no longer an instance. You are now your own person, your own geometry. I don't know what to call it. Your own entity. I'm going to undo here a few steps and go back. So let's do that again, right? So if I select let's do here, we'll do this one back here now. If I hit the C key, it just becomes, I don't know why it makes a folder for you, but it makes a folder for you, and then it puts that geometry inside of it. We can get rid of the folder if we want. And then now this is its own thing where, we can now start to kind of play with this, and it is just its own entity that has nothing to do with the master here, but this instance still is, right? You can also change change the master for an instance. So if we come here, we see that the reference object here is the size has the same name, but this is the red default one. But if I were to just drag and drop this other one into here, you can see that this would update. So this can be, whatever you want. You can add a cube here, and if we made this instance, if we made the reference object here the cube, it would, so you can change it without having to move its position and rotation and scale and all of that good stuff. So that's cool. We like that. So that's handy. Make editable. If you can't find this, if you're on an older version, by the way, it's probably up here, but if you hit Shift C, in Cinema, this works for anything, this has nothing to do with instances, you will get a command line, and anything that you start to type in, like make editable, anything in the entire program, if you want a cube, if you want to, say, convert edge to splines, if you want to find a cloner. So if you can't find it in the menu, if you just hit Shift-C, it will bring up this. And if you start to type in, so obviously you need to know what you're looking for, but this can be super handy. So you're not like hunting and pecking through all these menus or digging into like, all of these like icons. So that's good. Anyway, so right, make editable. If you can't find it here, then Shift-C or the shortcut C. Let's talk about mirroring instances. So I do this sometimes for chairs and seating. I do this sometimes for lighting instruments. If things are symmetrical from one side to the other, I do this a lot for audio arrays, where I'll build out the geometry on one side, and then I'm going to want to instance it on the other side. So if I were to grab all three of these chairs here, and let's just say I'm going to hit Alt-G here to make them into a group. We'll call this chairs. And so if I were to instance this now, I could move it over to the other side of the stage. But I'm getting an exact duplicate, and what I really want is a mirror. I want to kind of flip this over 0. And so that doesn't work so great. So how do we do this? Let's undo here. And let's keep undoing here. Let's get back to this group of chairs here. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. Right, so I've made this little kind of pretend stage here, right? And so here, this is center. This is the center line. So let's assume I want to mirror over center line. So, and this is a bunch of chairs. It could be a bunch of lighting instruments and truss. Could be whatever you want. I'm going to make a new null here, right? Which is this button right up here. And by default, that's going to happen at 0, 0, right? So the null can have its own geometry. Its own coordinates independent from the geometry. So let's call this chair master. And I'm going to take these. Some of them are instances and some of them are, regular geometry. It doesn't matter. You can make instances of instances. That's fine. So now I've got this chair master, and the beautiful thing is that the kind of axes, the point for this is at 0, so right on center line. So now I'm going to instance the whole null here, not just the chairs, but the actual null. And so, you can see here, right, we've got this duplicate in the exact same spot. Now, here's where the mirror part comes in. I'm going to come down to the coordinates. And again, if we go to this scale 1, 1, 1, so X, right, which is in red here, which is the left to right, we want to basically mirror on X. So if I were just to take 1 and make this -1, whoa. So you're scaling it -1, which makes absolutely no sense, but it's a great hack here for getting things to be kind of split over center. This is assuming, that your null that you created is actually on center line. So if your theater is off center, you're going to have to move that null, over to actual center point. Now, what's really cool about this technique also is that I'm instancing the folder, not just the objects. So anything that happens inside of the folder will also happen over here. So for example, if I start moving things around here a little bit, or if we start, rotating, whatever I do, even if I start adding stuff to the scene here. So if I were to make this little cube here, and if I throw this into the folder, like here it is, right? So this now becomes kind of an envelope for whatever you want. And inside of that, then with this one instance, I can mirror stuff over. So if you have multiple systems that you're trying to mirror over centerline, seating risers and chairs and audience and audio and all of that stuff, you can actually set this up to put as much stuff as you want inside of this folder and then just mirror it. And again, you're scaling this to -1, right? If I were to scale this on Z to -1, you can see here that now it's mirroring, this way, upstage, downstage, instead of like stage left, stage right, which is kind of weird, but you can do it. Right. And then this instance, again, you can move this as a whole. Right. And so if we were to just zero this guy out again, and set this to -1, then we have an exact kind of mate. So that's great. We love that. Okay. So let's take a look at something slightly different here. I've got some lightsabers, of course, as you do, just laying around. So here is our master kind of lightsaber, right? And then I've got 3 instances of it here just laid out. Now I've got this inside of a symbol folder that's hidden. So this is kind of similar to if we had, imported a symbol from Vectorworks, it would set it up like this. Now here's what I want you to note about this. I'm going to explain it, and then it'll make sense what I'm doing, and then you'll understand how we can apply this. In this lightsaber, there's 3 different objects, okay? There's the base here. There's some other kind of gold bits to the base. And then there's the actual kind of saber, the blade, right? The glowy part itself. So I've put a material on the base, this kind of silver. And I've put a material onto the gold, but I have not put any material onto the blade. Why? Well, if you set up a master like this, and then you make instances of it, if you apply a texture to the instance, anything that isn't textured in the instance will automatically take on the material properties applied to the instance. What am I saying? Let's take a look at this. Let's turn on the render here so you can see it. So here we are. And so I'm going to just go ahead and hide this one, right? Our master here. So again, the blade has nothing on it. So if I take this first instance and we just say put the blue on it, then you'll see that because the blade isn't textured in the master, anything that's untextured here is going to look to itself for a texture tag. And so this is great, because what this means now is that we can really have one instance, one master of the lightsaber, but that we can then go through and customize some of the coloring on it. And so, if I were to come in to this master here and, we were to modify the base somehow, I'm going to screw this up here, but, just to see if I start to just kind of make a modification. So all the things that we love about instances are great, but we can still then do some, you're kind of limited, because if you have multiple things untextured, you can only really have one material on the instance. But so I use this all the time when I'm doing like products on shelves, where you want to have, 3 rows of headphones, but you don't want them all to be the same color. And so instead of doing 3 separate cloners of, lights or instances, this way I can use one master, but I can go through and kind of change the color on the parts that I need. So it's weird. You may never use this. I don't use it a lot, but when I do use it, it's super handy, because I hate editing things multiple times and having to make kind of different versions of different things. All right. Let's go back to cloners for a minute. So that's some fun with instances, but There's a few more things with cloners that I want to talk about. So here I just have a simple scene. I have this chair and it's just in this linear cloner here, right? Spaced out, and there's 8 copies of it, right? So nothing fancy, just a typical cloner. Now this, we talked about make editable for kind of blowing apart instances. You can do the same thing with a cloner. So if I have my cloner here, and now if you're an instance or render instance, this is going to make a difference. So let's take a look. So I have this cloner here, and I'm set to instance. So I'm going to grab this, and again, I'm going to hit this make editable button. And when I do that, it's going to make a folder for me. And what it's done is it's now just basically dropped in 8 different versions of this. These aren't instances anymore. Because it was set to instance and not render instance, when I blow it apart and make it editable, I'm left with just 8 copies of actual geometry, right? And so these are, their own individual thing that I can kind of, control manually, right? So let's undo. I'm just going to hit Control Z here and take us back to this still being a cloner. Here we go. Okay, so now we're back to this being a cloner, right? And so that was instance. Now, if I switch this over to render instance, and I take this, and again, we're going to say make editable. So this time, what it's done is it's left me with 1 master and then 7 instances of this. And so that's great. I love that. So this can be really cool too, right? So this is great for like moving lights on truss, because you can set up a cloner, drop your instrument into it. And by this way, you're really using this like duplicate array where you can make the right number that you need, and you can, let me undo here again, right? You can, I need 11 of these and I want them spaced out, a little bit more, a little bit less. Get the lights right where you want them. And then with this set to render instance, just make it editable. And then, changes that you make to that one unit are going to carry through to just this kind of unit. So this is great. We love this because it gives you options to, keep it as a cloner, which obviously you can do. But, eventually you might want to kind of break it apart. Okay. And then, or if you want to go in here and say, I want control of, just this one chair, this one unit, right? You can break this apart a few different ways and then, figure out how you want to kind of get in there. If I break this apart, I can then say, oh, okay, now I'm going to grab this chair. And again, I'm going to now make this editable. And so now this one chair is, kind of unique to them all, but I'm still generally in this kind of instanced kind of world, right? So it's, there's no rights or wrongs here. It's always going to be on a per case basis. So, all right, that's cool. And now one more thing I just want to talk about. Let's go back here. So this is the kind of how do we make a crowd scene that we looked at in the other tutorial. I've added a few different kind of diverse bodies in here. I just want to show you, I kind of skipped this. So here's the cloner, right? This is set up to object. If you don't know what you're looking at, please go back and watch part 1 where I lay out this kind of system for audiences. And so, but I didn't talk about the seed here. So see this field 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So this is like, this is a mathematical representation of the randomness of how it's using these figures kind of in the scene. And so if I come in here, now you can see like right here, I've got 2 duplicates right next to each other. And if this is kind of like front and center in my camera, it's going to look weird. So I want to be able to change, the randomness around. One thing you can do is you can actually change the stacking order of the objects inside of the cloner, right? But you can see that this doesn't actually solve the problem. In fact, here it's made it worse because now there's 3 of them here. So if we select the cloner, if we come back to seed, if you just either go up or down or, cycle through these, you can basically just change, the layout, not the layout, but I guess you can change the randomness of where and how it's using these clones in here. So if you've cloned something and you're scattered it around and you just don't, you're like, well, this is great, but this guy's so tall, I don't really want him kind of front and center. Yeah, this is better, but now I've got this weird kind of hair girl here and, this guy. So you just keep kind of playing with it until you get to something that you kind of like. Oh yeah, so like that's great. I like that. And so then, you're good. Or if you were to take this whole system and, kind of duplicate it, right? And, and use it, well, I guess we can't, yeah, you can't just duplicate it, right? Because you got to move the guides. So, well, if you were to redo this whole system here, and move this guy is now looking for this. Right. Okay. So we've got two different like audience banks, but these are exactly the same. So if I come in here now and I just change the seed around, now I can kind of randomize, the people inside the mosh pit and the people, I don't know, outside of the runway or something. So seed here, it just lets you kind of play around with different iterations of things. Seed shows up in other spots here. I'm going off script, so this is where I'm going to screw this up. But if I come in here to the landscape here, let's make this a little bit larger here. So, it's given me, it's given me this, this kind of landscape kind of view. Now, this also has a seed. So if I were to kind of play with the seed, you can see like here's different like random variations of, kind of what we have in there. So the seed kind of shows up in other spots too. But for cloners, this is just really going to help us come in here and say, I'm using the same cloner system, but I want to kind of, randomize it slightly differently. All right. What a weird way to end the tutorial. All right, everybody. Thanks very much. More coming soon. Talk to you later.